Is Decap Attack still good? Decap Attack is a side-scrolling platformer released for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive back in 1991. The game was developed by Vic Tokai, who also developed Kid Cool for the NES, Psycho Fox for the Master System, and Magical Flying Turbo Hat Adventures for the Japanese Mega Drive. Decap Attack is actually a reskinned version of Magical Hat, with all new characters created for a Western audience. Like most of the aforementioned titles, Decap Attack was met with positive review scores upon release, and has continued to enjoy positive coverage as the years go by. Some have even declared this one a hidden gem. So is Decap Attack still good? Let's dive in. Decap Attack opens with a brief cutscene where we learn the game's villain, Max D. Cap, has emerged from the underworld to wreak havoc on the overworld, splitting an island into 7 different parts. Dr. Frankenstein and Igor have created a protagonist, Chuck D. Head, to go defeat this nemesis, restore the island, and make things right. After the brief intro, the player is dropped into the game and the adventure begins. The structure in Decap Attack is very linear, with each area being a different island mass, with 3 levels offered sequentially, and then a boss fight. The formula is repeated 7 times for a total of 21 levels across 7 unique areas. The controls are straightforward as well, and should be immediately familiar to fans of Vic Tokai's earlier games. Chuck has some slowish momentum, taking a few steps before reaching maximum velocity. Thankfully, momentum can be gained while jumping, helping the platforming to feel tight and precise. Even better, Chuck's descent can be slowed by rapidly pressing the jump button, not unlike Bonk in Bonk's Adventure. Attacking also feels great, and enemies can be defeated by jumping on them, punching them with Chuck's chest appendage, or collecting the skull power-up and throwing it like a projectile. If the player takes damage, however, the skull projectile will be gone until a new one is acquired. Still, the fact Chuck has a projectile attack, a melee attack, and can jump on enemies offers plenty of flexibility in tackling the levels. Speaking of which, the first area is Abdomen Land. This is a dilapidated forest-like area, matching the undead motif of the main character. In addition to learning the controls, it is here a wide variety of items will be discovered. Littered throughout every level are statues that can be smashed to reveal bonus items, coins, health, extra lives, or enemies. Most of these items are optional, except one. And the 3rd level of each area is a special item that must be located before the player is allowed to exit the level. The coins are also extremely valuable, and collecting all 5 will award the maximum chances in the end of the area bonus round. The bonus round offers the easiest way to rack up extra lives, along with other helpful goodies. But backing up a bit is the first boss fight. In reviewing the footage, it's clear I should be ducking under this boss's attack. However, one of the items is exceptionally useful against the bosses. The Ooze O2 item extends Chuck's melee attack and does extra damage for a whopping 10 seconds, making quick work of a majority of Decap Attack's bosses. This incredibly powerful power-up means you'll want to take the time to smash open and even seek out as many statues as you can throughout the game, as the items are an insanely useful tool, helpful for beating the game. Anyway, moving on, we arrive at the 2nd world, Elbow Island. If I'm honest, this doesn't look a whole lot different than Abdomen Land, and the structure isn't much different either. On the flip side, there are some water segments. Mercifully, Chuck can still use all of his attacks while underwater, which makes this far less painful than water levels found in contemporary titles of the time. There are some moving platforms as well, but the precise jumping and hovering abilities make these pretty painless. A few other things to note are how the levels change from being mostly horizontal to vertical, offering up new challenges through clever level design. Enemy placement is thoughtful as well, rarely surprising the player as they move up or down the screen. However, you could use something like the Swill power-up to gain temporary invincibility and then race down the screen with no regard. For as cool as this is, what is less cool is the start back. If you die at all during the level, you are forced back to the very beginning. All of the statues remain broken too, so any health or items will not reappear, which is kind of a bummer and unfairly punishes a new player that needs these bonuses the most. Moving on, we arrive at boss number 2, a giant frog, or maybe it's a toad, that hops around the screen while little hoppers jump out of its back. Like before, using the Ooze O2 power-up will supercharge Chuck's attack and make this fight rather easy. Area 3 is Tibuland, and the scenery finally changes. The first stage also auto-scrolls, forcing the player to react to enemies and platforms quickly to avoid taking damage by the manic totem pole chasing Chuck. It is here one will learn how invaluable the skull projectile really is, allowing the player to take out enemies as soon as they appear on the screen, offering a nice reward for cautious play. I should also note, while the levels are very linear with an obvious path forward, there are a ton of nooks and crannies in nearly every level for those who like to explore. Here, for example, venturing off the beaten path will lead to a breakable wall, and eventually 4 statues. There is no timer to force quick play either, which works well with the overall level design. One thing I don't like is how enemies respawn when you revisit an area. Here I use the Xenon power-up, which instantly kills everything on the screen and makes the screen all trippy. Unfortunately, all of the destruction is for naught as the enemies reappear as you make your way back through the water. I find it odd the game remembers which statues have been broken, but not which enemies have been defeated. Moving on is boss number 3. By this point, the player has probably collected a bunch of an item called the Trioxy. This item is designed to do big damage to bosses. It won't take them down in one hit or anything, but these make bosses easier and are worth seeking out. And like before, the boss fight is a cakewalk thanks to easy patterns and the power-ups. After this is World 4, Armington. I'm not really sure what this level theme is, but there is an emphasis on water. The difficulty is also increasing thanks to a reliance on collapsing platforms and more enemies requiring 2 hits to take down. Once you learn which enemies take multiple hits, you'll start planning your attacks and managing items more proficiently. For example, these otter things pursue Chuck in a way where it's hard to dodge them. It's better to throw the skull at them if available, or use an item to take them down. Same goes for the piranha plants. While standing still, waiting for 2 hits to register isn't exactly riveting gameplay, I do like how different strategies can be utilized in different situations. After dealing with the new enemies, we arrive at yet another boss. This is one of the few times in the game where ducking is necessary in the adventure, allowing the giant brain to safely pass overhead. Master this and the boss is predictably simple to take down. With the brain defeated, Chuck arrives at World 5, Pumpington, a tropical volcano-style level. There really isn't much to say here. The difficulty remains high, with 2-hit enemies and collapsible platforms. A second auto-scroll level is presented as well, with the difficulty ramped up with a massive amount of breakable walls impeding Chuck's path. The area concludes with what I consider to be the toughest boss in the game. This mole-like critter is safely underground for a majority of the battle, making only a brief appearance where the player can get in some hits. However, after a few hits, the mole will throw rocks at the player, which become increasingly more challenging to dodge due to their random nature. With the limited power-ups, because statues don't reset after death, and just a few continues, the combination of a tough World 5-3 and this mole boss was the cause of a couple of game overs for me. Perhaps I'm attacking the challenge incorrectly, but the difficulty spike here is pretty brutal. Thankfully, things are toned down in Last Leg Land. These act as the obligatory ice world, but isn't as annoying as one would expect. The slow momentum, hovering mechanic, and platform-heavy nature of all 3 stages makes these rather pleasant, instead of slippery and tedious, so kudos to the developers. I should also give praise to the melee attack, which not only has a nice reach and is void of any hit detection issues, but also doesn't slow Chuck down. He can take down enemies without losing momentum, which is awesome when penguin things are racing at you on the icy platforms. This also leads to my favorite boss in the whole game. This giant ape isn't particularly challenging. His attack patterns are easy with telegraphed projectiles and jumps, and it's easy to move in and get in headshots during his vulnerability period. Instead, I just love how detailed he is. His legs, arms, body, head, lower jaw, and eyeballs all move independently from each other, making for some of the smoothest animations found in the whole game. It's impressive, and one of the highlights found in Decap Attack. It's still easy though. With the island nearly restored, we find ourselves in the 7th and final area, Island. This is a cave-style level with plenty of lava pits, small platforms, and water. Still, as has been the case for a majority of the game, the structure hasn't changed much, and as best as I can tell, not a single new enemy type is introduced. If you've managed to make it this far without running out of continues, you'll easily cruise through these 3 stages on the way to the final boss. This boss, which appeared during the opening cutscene, is a worthy final foe. Only his head is vulnerable to attack. He'll cause boulders to fall from the top of the screen, and he'll launch a couple of flames which home in on Chuck. It can be overwhelming and tough to maneuver through 3 separate obstacles while trying to land hits. However, if you manage to avoid a game over screen and hoarded the Trioxy power-up, which launches a massive attack at the boss, this fight is anticlimactic. After a few superpowered punches to the face before he ratcheted up his attacks, I used 9 of these things in a row to take him down with minimal fuss. Depending on what items you have remaining, this fight will either be incredibly frustrating or extremely easy. In any case, after defeating him and exiting the level, the final piece of the island is restored and the final cutscenes play out. Max Decap returns to the underworld as Chuck races to Dr. Frankenstein. Sadly, poor Chuck collapses at his doorstep, exhausted from the epic journey he just completed. Then, the Mad Doctor restores the mummified body into a man for some unexplained reason, marking the end of the game. Then, of course, the credits roll. Graphically, Decap Attack is inconsistent. Technically speaking, there are few flaws to speak of. The frame rate is smooth, sprites are large and detailed, there is no flicker whatsoever, and the developers seem to do a good job working within the confines of the Genesis hardware. I wish there was more than a single layer of parallax scrolling, but this is really just a personal preference and not a requirement for pleasing visuals. Artistically, however, Decap Attack is all over the map. Some levels are gorgeous, with an oversaturated color palette helping the game feel like a Saturday morning cartoon. Other levels are downright ugly, with a muddled color palette and complete lack of contrast between the background and foregrounds, making the game look more primitive than it really is. Other levels have a nice contrast, but with the graphical fidelity more on par with the 8-bit Master System than the 16-bit Genesis. Needless to say, the artistic quality is inconsistent. A few things I do like are the character designs. Chuck looks terrific, and it's easy to see he's a mummy with a head bursting out of his chest. The bloody touches are icing on the cake, giving the character a super weird, surprisingly unique look, and a nice change of pace from the anthropomorphic animal designs of nearly all platformers of the day. Enemy design follows suit with a host of different creatures, some realistic, others less so, but all featuring pleasing caricature-like exaggerations. While the artistic quality is spotty, the audio quality is overall really good. While the opening music sounds a bit cheap with some bad Genesis twang, this is an anomaly. The soundtrack as a whole is good. The tracks are lengthy with various sections building into catchy choruses. The instruments are layered with a solid bed of drums under smooth synthesized notes, creating some truly pleasant tracks. A few are real earworms as well, and some of the melodies are extremely catchy. I wouldn't put this up there with some of the best efforts from Konami or Sega, but it's a great effort nonetheless. The sound effects, on the other hand, are a lot less refined. The sliding sound when Chuck changes directions is just a bit too high-pitched, and the sound an enemy makes when you jump on them is very low quality. The audio oddities aren't too frequent, but definitely stand out against the smooth sounds of the background music. So, with all of that out of the way, we arrive back to the question asked at the beginning of the video: is Decap Attack still good? Of all the things Decap Attack does, both good and bad, what's most impressive about the game is how few flaws there are. There are no bottomless pits, for example, no blind jumps, the invincibility period is lengthy, allowing the player proper time to recover after failure, the difficulty curve is mostly linear, the controls are flawless, and the game is void of anything truly frustrating. Better still, Chuck can still attack while underwater, and the icy sections exercise restraint. Enemy placement is also solid, with few, if any, surprising moments meant to unfairly trick the player. It's like the exact opposite of another classic platformer, The Lion King, which broke nearly every game design rule in the book. It's refreshingly straightforward, in a way. That straightforwardness is also what prevents Decap Attack from entering the upper echelon of 16-bit platformers. Don't get me wrong, there are some things that stand out. Using a skull for a projectile is satisfying and unique. Chuck runs spastically like one would expect of a mummy, and I really dig the power-ups. While they mostly function the same, allowing temporary invincibility or increasing damage done to bosses, the item management gives the game a little depth without being cumbersome. But for me, it all comes back to the overall design. Other than the 2 chase levels, a majority of the game feels basically the same. There is a real lack of variety in the challenges. Chuck has abilities like ducking, as well as the ability to skip over water, but these abilities are never utilized. Instead, the same basic platforming gimmicks are repeated over and over through the game's 21 levels. Decap Attack needs more unique moments, like in the auto-scrolling level where you have to break walls before being crushed, rather than the supremely basic platforming usually presented. While the difficulty ramps up somewhat as the adventure unfolds, it is disappointing to see the same enemies found in the first world are also on the last world. With 21 levels and a 2-hour runtime, there really should be a lot more variety. Instead, the player will have seen it all and done it all by about the halfway mark. Decap Attack really needed some refinement to take better advantage of Chuck's extensive moveset, the item set, and the awesome Halloween-esque feel of the game. Gimmicks are carried over from the previous games, like how Chuck will rapidly move his feet when running off a platform. Even though momentum has carried him too far to actually recover, it's just unnecessary. Finally, creativity was put into the area names like Abdomain Land and Elbow Island, matching the body parts of the islands, but this thought isn't always carried over into other aspects of the game. Battling a neon-colored mole with sunglasses just seems odd when you're piloting a headless mummy in a land called Pumpington. And for me, this is Decap Attack. It's a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none platformer. While Chuck is a cool character and the music is surprisingly good, underneath the thin veneer is a very by-the-book, bare-bones experience. The platforming is about as simple as it gets, and while Chuck's unique projectile attack and floating jump do help it stand out, Decap Attack contains little else to help it stand apart from the competition. It's still good for sure, but there are much better platformers on the Genesis and the 16-bit generation as a whole.